Emily and Melanie are going to talk about their work looking at physical activity. They're graduate students at Western University in Canada, and it's been fun working with you. And please welcome Emily and Melanie.
There we go. Thank you for inviting us here, BJ. We're very excited to be talking about how we're using the concepts that you just introduced. Oh, thanks. We're excited to be talking about how we are using the concepts that were just kind of introduced this morning in health behavior research. So as BJ alluded to, and Eric as well yesterday, health behavior research is a really slow process. We get slowed down by timelines and funding constraints, and then also the problem of scalability and transferability. So how do we get the knowledge that we generate 12 years after the fact that it was interesting out into the public and into a program that works for people?
So currently the way that we're prescribing exercise in healthcare and in our research is following the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines, which are the same as the American ones. So generally, we're trying to get people to do 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week, which generally breaks down to about 30 minutes of activity per day. The way that it's currently prescribed is using what they call a FIT formula. So we have frequency, intensity, type, and time. So essentially, normally you would say that you would need to exercise 4 to 6 days per week at about 75% of your maximal heart rate. You would work with them a little bit to find out what type of exercise they like to do, so whether it be running, swimming, aerobics classes, and then the time again would be about 30 minutes a time. So you can see how this would be very overwhelming if you were coming for help and I was just giving you do it this, exercise this hard, and that's what you need to do, leave it there, without giving any sort of guidance on how you might meet that goal. So how are you going to get to the 30 minutes? Just, you need to get to 30 minutes, off we go. Right now with our research, we got funding to run a very large-scale study where we were able to use mobile devices to assist in activity prescription and uptake. So people were monitoring their health, monitoring their activity, and hopefully being able to put it all together and see that as they got more active, their cardiovascular risk came down, so their health improved, and this could be monitored by researchers through a back database. We did find this intervention to be very successful, actually, but it was successful for these people up here. So if we go back to BJ's model that he showed us yesterday with high motivation at the top, we had people who are essentially an ideal population for exercising. So they were highly motivated and had a very high ability, and so they were able to succeed at this sort of very difficult exercise intervention. So as we go on with our research now and go into our next steps, our challenge is going to be able to scale this to a more typical population, so more of the sedentary population, higher risk, so the people who really don't have very high motivation. So our first step would be to sort of bring it back to people who are moderately motivated and have a pretty high ability. Our intervention still might work for them, but we really want to be able to start to incorporate the baby steps and the tiny habits kind of thing to work for the people with very low motivation and very low ability. And this is where we would be able to have the most impact for the types of people who need this intervention most or who could benefit from it most.
So this feeds directly into scaling the intervention to our target end users. So thinking from a tiny habits type perspective and mapping out how they would get that exercise prescription. So again, thinking 30 minutes of aerobic activity on a day. So instead of just handing a prescription note or a pad out to somebody, a script, we would sit down with them as exercise physiologists and map out how they're going to achieve that process. So for example, say we have Doug, and Doug has just received his script from his doctor saying you need to exercise for 30 minutes. Doug comes and talks with us, and we're going to map out how he achieves that. So he might mention to us, oh, well, at work we have a pickup basketball game on Wednesdays. So how's Doug going to make it to that pickup basketball game? So we're going to talk to him about the baby steps to get there, things like going home tonight and finding your running shoes at the back of the closet, making sure they still have laces. putting them in the trunk of your car so that they're at work with you and you have kind of no excuse to do it. They're there, they're ready, and you're ready to go. We might need to have Doug set up a text message reminder with a buddy or a coworker at work who says, I'm going to the game right now, I want to come with me. So when he reads that message, he knows it's time to get up from his desk and actually go enjoy the pickup basketball game. And when he's there, he gets his 30 minutes of exercise. So he's achieved his exercise prescription, and we've just mapped out how to make it super simple for him so that he isn't failing at it and he's not floundering. He's mapped it out and he knows what he needs to be doing. So one of the primary goals that BJ had asked us all to focus on while talking at this conference is how to take this home, how you guys can use it at home. So we feel that baby steps is an exciting and novel, new, innovative approach for health behavior research because our research designs are so large scale. This is a new concept, it's hard to get funding, but it will allow for a more individualized and tailored approach for health behavior interventions. And in the interest of time, we weren't able to go into a lot of ideas or strategies for mapping that out, but if you are interested and you want to talk to us, please do come find us, we're here all day, or you can email us after and we'd be happy to talk about how do you map out strategies for achieving these target behaviors using the baby step model that BJ was talking about. So I don't know, it doesn't look like a lot of you did it, but there were instructions on your table this morning to write down kind of a one-sentence summary of what your product or company does. And so we'd like you to take a minute or two now, if you haven't already done that, to do that, but follow that up with how you feel that your company can match with health behavior research. So maybe it's something...
Got it? Okay, questions for you guys. I've got two questions. Number one, your advisor, your colleagues back at Western University, how have they responded? What was the reaction to the, oh, we're just going to get people to do teeny tiny stuff?
Yeah, so when we sort of brought that back to our supervisor, he was initially a little bit confused, let's say. But after we took some time and described the whole process to him, he was pretty excited about it. He thought it'd be very new and innovative, and he's quite happy with that. But he did have some reservations about how we might go about getting funding and how we might make it bigger so we would qualify for funding. Okay. So a bit of an oxymoron there.
How will you find those people who are sedentary, who are not motivated? Because in some ways, that's the hardest group to target, and hopefully we'll talk about some of that later today. How do you get that? I'm a fan, if you're starting a new company or a new venture, you start with your easiest audience. You don't start with the hardest case. In this case, you're not starting a new company or venture, and you're trying to make a change in public health, so you're figuring out how to reach those people. How do you find them and involve them in a study? Why don't they just say, no, I'm not interested? How's that going?
That does happen.
Okay.
But we have a little bit of a user population built in. So with the study that we were talking about before, we targeted people that were willing to participate, and we screened them in specifically for the fact that they knew they were committing to a one-year study. With the study we're doing right now, we're just targeting basically all patients at a family care practice in our area. And so some of them are dropping out, some of them aren't doing it, but we're prescribing the activity with them and telling them that if it is too hard or they felt like they've overcommitted, that they can contact us. So they still have their BlackBerry, we BBM with them, and so it's contact and it's making it simpler. Sorry, BlackBerry, not iPhone, but but it's making it simpler and smaller, and we're creating it into those tiny chunks that they can be successful at the smallest thing, and success begets success.
Great. Good. We'll stay tuned to how it goes. Now, one thing I don't think people know. How many people have the Fuel Band, the Nike Plus Fuel Band? Can you raise your hand? You have these two students to thank. Here's why. Because as we were talking about how to do this research, it was like, well, let's use some activity monitor. And the response was, well, we don't have funding to buy them. And I said, well, you shouldn't have to buy them. They should be donated by somebody. Let's go to work on it. So when Nike called me about something else, I said, oh, by the way, you heard from Shahab Salime. I got his name right this time, yesterday. You heard from Shahab, and he went to work and got it done, coordinate. Have you met Linda Fogg Phillips, my sister Linda?
Hi.
Okay, so yeah, so Linda's will be working with you guys, and so that's how it all came about. So, two things you should be thanking them for. One, great talk, and two, for helping, I think for the first time ever, bring together a set of devices that academics, nonprofits, groups without a ton of money can use on a temporary basis, and we have this loaner library of devices. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Got it. You know, these are metal, and these have magnets. That'd be cool. Magnets? I am excited to bring to the stage David Kirchhoff from Weight Watchers. Before you come up, David, some of you have met him already. He was here yesterday. I want you to take a moment and in your tables talk about how many people do you know that have been on Weight Watchers or are doing Weight Watchers. And we'll give you about 30 seconds, just go around the table, 3, 7, 20, whatever. At Thanksgiving, so at my home, we had some friends over, and we had about 20 friends over, and we brought up Weight Watchers. Every single person in the room, as I remember it, had been at Weight Watchers or was actively going, everybody. And I was just stunned. It's like, was this, you know, I've been kind of not aware of Weight Watchers for many years, and it came onto my radar thanks to TEDMed, and I met Dave there, and so on. So I was kind of tuned in. But it's like, oh, there's this whole, like sub-layer of society going on that I was completely unaware of. And since then, I've kind of tuned in. I read the magazine, and I've been going to Weight Watchers ever since, and all that kind of stuff. So in your tables, make a guess. How many people do you know in your life that have done Weight Watchers? Take about 30, 45 seconds. Ready, go. How do we do? All right, let's go for the extremes. Is there a table where you think the average was lower than 3? Fewer than 3 people. Any table? Okay. Is there a table where the average was about 5? Is there a table where the average is, let's say, 8 or so? Did anybody have a table where it was 10 or more? Ta-da, there we go. Okay, was there anybody out? There's a few that are not from the US, and perhaps you don't have friends using Weight Watchers, but I think it's touched all our lives directly or indirectly. I have said, and I don't have any stock in Weight Watchers, but I have to resist from being like this huge, huge fan. I think in the future, it might be 20 years from now, everybody will be on doing Weight Watchers or something like it. I'm just not seeing any other solution to turning the obesity problem around. If you have something other than that, let me know, because I'm just not seeing it, frankly. And so David Kirchhoff, if you don't have his book, there's some copies here. There's outside. We were really happy to get the books in. David has been really fun to get to know. We've had some chats around how behavior works, what Weight Watchers is doing, and so on. He's very impressive. I'm really excited to have somebody like that lead Weight Watchers at this really important time in history. And I won't spend a whole bunch more time introducing you, because you have a whole book and you can read more about his bio. Please welcome David Kirchhoff to the stage. Welcome.
BJ for Senate. Healthcare funding. You
know, you have a crazy schedule, I know that, and the book has made it even more complicated, I guess, in some ways, but talk to us.
I will. So how many of you it's hot off the press, so you may not have had a chance to see it, but how many of you have seen or are familiar with the new HBO documentary, Weight of the Nation? Quite a few. I have not had a chance to fully watch it. I was at a dinner last night where they screened about 20 minutes of it. I've got the DVDs sitting in my bag. And I would tell you that it's pretty grim stuff. I would also tell you that it's worth watching. And they take a particular approach and a particular angle on it, pretty big angle, but it's a little bit more of kind of a policy, public health, food system orientation for a lot of good reasons. But I'll just quickly share with you a couple of statistics just to sort of bring the dimension of the problem into focus. So as you may or may not know, about 35% of American adults today are clinically obese. That means they have a body mass index greater than 30, 78 million people. What you may also know is that today, and that the latest forecast actually has just come out of the CDC, is that by the year 2030, that's probably going to be more like 42%. That today, diabetes affects about 11% of adult Americans. That's double from 1970. And the problem with that is that, you know, that's 26 million people today, but there's another 78 million that are pre-diabetic. And I would tell you that when you look at everything that's going on with the economy, and in particular the way resources are being used in this country, there's a big problem with healthcare. And the biggest problem with healthcare is that, you know, rising incident rates of chronic disease caused by lifestyle is literally threatening to bankrupt the healthcare system, Medicaid, Medicare, et cetera. It's impacting large employers, it's crowding out wage growth, and it's frankly making us sick, literally, in the process. Is obesity a disease? I don't know. It's certainly a health condition, if nothing else. So when I talk about these, to sort of talk about how significant the issue is, but also to just give a sense of the scope of what we're trying to do. And the issue that I see is that we're dealing with such a large group of people, it can feel pretty overwhelming. You know, it's 180 million adults in this country, men and women, are overweight or obese. Right now we have 350,000 primary care physicians. If primary care physicians were directly overseeing every person who has prediabetes, it would be a ratio of 220 to 1. So to me, the interesting question is, how do you do massive population-wide behavior change? Let me talk a little bit about obesity in terms of causal effects, because I think it's important to understanding a little bit the complexity of what causes us to overeat is helpful in terms of thinking about potential solutions to help people live a different way. What we know is that obesity in this country and frankly abroad is a function of a very rapid, sudden change in our food environment. I'm not a warrior. I don't have an axe to grind on this point. I generally think most people are fairly benign, including people in the food industry. But nonetheless, things change very quickly, not necessarily with ill intent, but they did. And today, there's 600 more calories available per capita per day today than there was in 1970, or an increase in the food supply of, let's call it 25 to 30%. The vast majority of those foods are going to be foods with added sugars and fats, otherwise known as processed food, junk food, however you want to think about it. The cost of processed food has stayed relatively low, where the cost of non-processed food, vegetables, fruits, things like that, has gone up at a much higher rate. And so the environmental effects are complicated, but they're made more complicated by the way that our, you know, horrible and unhelpful brains react to food. The historical way of thinking about why people overeat has been based on something called homeostatic eating, which is as I become hungry, I'm sending signals, or I should say my thalamus is sending signals that I'm hungry, I need food intake. It's a little bit governed by, you know, blood glucose levels and everything else. And therefore, I'm being given the signal to begin eating. Once I become full, then you know, a different set of hormones are going up and to the thalamus, and it's telling me I'm done. And what that has led is a lot of the research around dealing with obesity has been therefore focused on things that affect that pathway. And this is where you get into, you know, these great giant battles over carbs versus sugars and this and that and everything else. But part of the problem I have with this is that that's just one pathway, and it does matter. But there's other pathways that have been much more recently sort of focused on that you can think of as broadly falling under the concept of what's called hedonic eating. So hedonic eating would be eating for reasons that have nothing to do with what's going on in my blood sugar levels. But frankly, it is reward-seeking behavior. And what they've done is functional MRIs of people struggling with obesity versus normal weight people. And people who struggle with obesity, you know, with their fMRIs in front of a bowl of ice cream, it's like, you know, Christmas tree. Whereas people not struggling with obesity, not much going on. And so what we're seeing is that the grip that foods, particularly trigger foods, have on us is pretty powerful stuff. And it's difficult for us to deal with. So that's one problem area. The other problem area that I point out is I would put under the sort of the general guideline of mindlessness. Really interesting research out of Cornell University. One of my favorite researchers is a guy named Brian Wansink, who does just fascinating experiments on humans. And one of his observations is that the average person is making about 200 to 220 food decisions every day, yet they can only recall about 15. And what's happening here is that when food is around, we're seeing it, we're making a decision either to have it or not have it. So imagine you're sitting in a conference room and there's like the big, like on the side table full of muffins, like the one that I saw outside. And and so you walk by it, you look at it and say, I don't need a pastry, but you just made a decision. And then if you think about that in another, you know, set of work around decision fatigue, which is that if you're forced to make a decision over and over again, think of it as waterboarding, you will eventually break. We can break just about anybody with the right trigger food set in the right environment. And then there's finally something called hot states versus cold states. And a hot state is when you're trying to make decisions while the food's right in front of you and you feel yourself being filled with this sense of, I don't know what else to call it other than just unbridled lust. And in fact, a lot of the research on hot states has been around, you know, why do people have unprotected sex and everything else? It's called a hot state, it applies to food, whereas a cold state is when you're planning. So all of these things are happening, and then there's habits, which is we eat for reasons we can't quite describe after dinner. And there's good habits and bad habits. And then the interesting thing about this is that, so you have your thalamus on the homeostatic pathway, you have your cerebral cortex processing sensory inputs, you have your prefrontal lobe, which is, you know, trying to make sense of this and kind of keep things vaguely under grip, and then you have your basal ganglia, which is managing the habit pathways. And so various aspects of your brain are interacting with this food environment. And it makes this a complicated process to solve. And it's one of the reasons why, if there's nothing else that you take away when you think about obesity, you should be thinking that this concept of willpower is vastly overrated. It just doesn't work. It's too complicated. We've been trained for too many thousands of years to, when food is in front, our biology is working for us to make sure we don't starve to death. So these systems were put in for our defense, but when you have a change in the environment this quickly, it's hard to deal with. Consider an article, did anyone have a chance to read an article? It came out in the New York Times Magazine at the beginning of the year by Tara Parker Pope called The Fat Trap. Really great article, passionately written, and she talked about the difficulty of losing weight and keeping it off. The fact that as you lose weight, your metabolism slows down because your body's freaking out and it's trying to protect its energy stores. She talks about sort of the fact that your brain is kind of going into revolt because it wants this food. And it was a great article because it said a lot of things that need to be said, but it was also, frankly, a little depressing because it leaves you with, so what do we do? And the problem I have is that if we say we're going to change the world by regulating the food system back to 1965, were we able to do that and force everyone to go back to 9-inch plates, that would be awesome because it really would have a huge impact on this problem. Does anybody here think that there's legitimately any political will in this country right now to make that happen? Show of hands. Okay. Kind of leaves us in a bit of a conundrum. So do we wait for this to happen? Or do we try to, rather than waiting for someone to clean up our crime-infested neighborhood, you know, it's kind of like we need to start Neighborhood Watch. And we need to start protecting ourselves and taking proactive steps to managing our circumstances. Which is a little bit why I kind of ended up writing the book that I wrote. And to me, when you think about a behavior change process when it comes to obesity, it's complicated because it involves so many different behaviors. I I mean, not only are some of the behaviors, as you saw in BJ's graph, kind of big, there's a lot of them. And you're really trying to impact a lot of different behaviors, and there's this feeling that you're trying to do it all at once. And so, you know, one of the things that I've been examining kind of my own process, and I love the fact that we had Cy Sperling on yesterday because I use that joke all the time. I am like Cy Sperling Hair Club for Men. I'm not only the president, I'm a member. And I've been spending a lot of time examining my own process, and one of the things I talk about is the fact that it took me 9 years to finally get to my goal weight. I mean, I was losing 40 pounds. How slow was that? And the reality was I was sort of losing weight, gaining, so on and so forth until I finally got to my goal weight. And while I think it's depressing, it took me 9 years to get there, I'm very proud about the fact that I've kept my weight off for 3 years. And you know, what I would tell you about is that I learned much, much more in the 3 years of maintaining my weight loss than I learned in the 9 years that it took me to get there. And the difference is in those first 9 years, I was thinking like a dieter, which is do something super hardcore for 2 or 3 months, get to this magical goal, the skies will open, the angels will sing, and everything will be really awesome from there on out, which just never really quite worked. Rather, when I finally got to goal weight and I was on maintenance, I think for me the big difference is that I really started thinking much more about changing habits and changing patterns. And this is what I think is a really powerful idea, is that when I think about kind of the things that I've sort of stumbled on in some respects, is that I now have in my inventory a bunch of really good habits that I can count on that have kept me protected in this weight loss maintenance phase. And those are things like I always eat a healthy breakfast. Interesting, when I wrote the book, I talked about the evolution of my breakfast, and I have 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, like software revisions. So I was doing my own kind of not so rapid prototype testing. Each one seemed to take me like 6 months, I don't know why. But you know, it was getting to a point that I could find a breakfast that felt like it was a lot of food, it was easy to do, and it's fairly mindless. I have the same thing every day for breakfast. And that's powerful for me because I'm not making a decision. I exercise now generally 7 days a week. Wake up at 5 in the morning. I'm good for 60 to 90 minutes, and people say, wow, you're so disciplined. And what I say all the time is, I am not. That I started relatively small, where we just had our second baby. I had no time for myself. We had a gym that I didn't use downstairs, and I started going down so I could listen to my music, have like 1 hour for myself, and I had a little reward that made it kind of worth my while, and I began to lift weights, and that gradually built over time. But one of the things I very quickly did was I established a routine and a cue, which is I'm getting ready to go to bed. I set out my gym clothes, I put an energy drink on my mouse pad. It's just a very fast thing I do each night. It creates kind of a cue so that when the alarm goes off at 5 a.m., the only thing I have to do is stand up. Because the second I stand up, it's object-oriented programming, like I'm now on a process. And it just all kind of happens until, curiously, I end up back at home having just exercised. I do not mix up my exercise routine. I do the same thing in a 7-day schedule. It's my own little weird Rube Goldberg construct, and people tell me all the time, that's so wrong, you need to shock your muscles, blah, blah, blah. But for me, what I realize is that I have to respect my routine because it literally is taking decision-making out, and that is why I'm able to exercise 6 to 7 days a week. This is the process people have to go through. It took me 8 years to get to that, or yeah, about 8 years to get to that 6 to 7 day a week place. It gradually changed over time. This is, by the way, what a weight loss process looks like. What I would also tell you about a weight loss process is we tend to talk about weight loss phase versus maintenance phase. It's BS. There's no difference between the two. The biggest mistake people make when they're trying to lose weight is they're doing something artificial, they're girding their loins, they're going to war, they're doing something hardcore. But the problem and the advice I would give people over and over again is that what you're doing while you lose weight should be something you could see yourself doing for the rest of your life. If you're feeling deprived and miserable, you will almost certainly fail. So in all these things, it's, you know, I think about this and say, okay, I look at my individual or personal example and say, well, gosh, maybe this is solvable, because if I could get 180 million people to take the 12-year process that I just did, maybe we could solve this problem. That feels a little overwhelming, particularly because, I had 40 pounds to lose. What I would tell you is that the average person walking into a Weight Watchers meeting, she is, although there's more he's these days, but she's 5'4", she weighs about 199 pounds, which gives her a BMI of 32 and change. What I would tell you is that is kind of the middle of the overweight and obese population, the 70% of Americans. That means for her to get to a BMI of 25, she'd have to lose 50 pounds. For most people, that's probably not going to happen for a variety of reasons. However, if she loses merely 10% of her weight, 20 pounds, she will reduce her risk of type 2 diabetes by 60%. So we're not talking about making swimsuit models. What we're talking about is getting people to make sustained changes. Now, when I think about a habit, and I've been a big admirer of BJ's work. If anyone had a chance to look at this Duhigg book, The Power of Habit, he does a nice job of summarizing a bunch of research that's been out there and putting it in kind of a user-friendly way. But the way he expresses it, which is not dissimilar from the way BJ talks about it, is think of a habit as cue, routine, reward. And that's generally, so your brain needs a reward to make it worth its while, motivation. Cue is something that signals it's time to let the object kick into gear. And routine is kind of doing the same thing each time. What I would also tell you, though, is that there's kind of an X factor that goes with that whole process, which is, whether it's motivation or how you think about it, I mean, it's belief. And I hear this a lot, and I hear it a lot from the people that come to us, is that what we see is that people who come to us and believe that if they simply go through this process, they will be successful are generally successful. People who come to us already doubting themselves and are convinced that they're going to fail, but they feel like they owe it to themselves to try, generally fail. And so then you end up into this very tricky quandary of how do you create belief? Why do we have Weight Watchers meetings? I would tell you is that for creating belief, one very powerful mechanism of group support is that there's been a lot of great studies that show it is a lot easier for a group of people together to develop a shared sense of belief than it is for individuals to develop a sense of belief. So when I think about what Weight Watchers does, just by way of example, I mean, one way you can think about it is, we have a mobile app. Which is incredibly popular for us. It's a big part of our suite. It's one element. We have a pretty robust website with a big web-based application for tracking recipes, building your own recipes, things like that. We've got iPad and Android apps, and now we have a barcode scanner. We have group support. We've got our curriculum. We have the actual program itself. I mean, what we're basically doing is we're trying to come up with a full suite of applications, support mechanisms, curriculum, program, et cetera, that people can use to help themselves through a behavior change process. I'll be honest with you, we struggle. We struggle, and it's one of the things that I was hoping we could talk about in the Q&A, but one of the things we struggle with is that when people come to us, they're feeling incredibly out of control, they're frustrated, they're upset, they're doubting themselves. And so we have these great debates, and like I'm now I have to deprogram all these people that BJ has been completely messing with their heads, that like, oh, everything's tiny habits and all this. So I'm now having to try to clean that up. And actually, I joke, but I think about it, and part of the problem is people are coming to us feeling out of control. One of the things we have to do is to very quickly, I believe, give them an ability to sort of get things under control pretty fast. So I'm a believer that we still have people start counting points. The interesting thing about points is that for us, it is itself a giant behavior modification tool. If you think about what the wrong way to think about points, and we have members, by the way, who think about it the wrong way, which is that it's a pinpoint way to manage your calorie deficit. It's not. Tracking is notoriously unreliable and inaccurate. People are so bad at estimating how much they're actually eating because there's so much mindlessness, gauging portion size, everything else. However, keeping a food diary is incredibly powerful for making you much more mindful about what's going on. We could simply say, well, should we just have people write down their foods? But what we do instead is we say, yeah, but there's good foods and not good foods. So we have this formula that Points Plus is based on that's trying to nudge people toward foods that are higher in nutrients, in protein and fiber, and also biasing people toward vegetables and fruits. We try to give them a sort of a balance to aspire to make them more in tune to portion size. So it's an educational tool, but it's also kind of an accountability and control mechanism, and it's one example. It's complicated. I mean, it's a lot to start tracking points. There's a bunch of work. However, it's a very fast way of getting control. But I struggle because it's certainly what you wouldn't call like a tiny habit. On the other hand, it allows you to quickly get some points up on the scoreboard, which is really important in terms of very quickly building people's confidence, because once you start building their confidence, then you can really start getting them engaged and starting to make other changes. So almost the way I think about this is get people under control quickly, help them get some very quick wins that are going to mean something to them. And if they're not seeing it, I will tell you that if people do not see any weight loss in the first 3 weeks, they're not going to stay. Their expectations are going to be such that we have to respect that no matter how hard we try to tell them that they don't need to lose weight for the first 3 weeks, they're going to want to lose weight for the first three weeks. However, I think we also have an opportunity to get people to start systematically making changes to their habits. I do this on myself all the time, and it's endlessly fascinating to me. And it's actually the first conversation I had with BJ back at this TED Med conference this past fall, which I had this problem with the minibar. I generally have a big problem with mindless grazing. And it comes up in so many different places. I wasn't sure where to attack it, but I had particular examples that were just irritating the hell out of me. Like, why is it that I can't stop myself from opening up that minibar at 10 p.m. after I get back from dinner? It's kind of like, risky business, get off the babysitter. It's like, Dave, get off the minibar. But what I struggled with is I said, I kind of felt like I need to have like a self-inflicted intervention. So I started tweeting each day saying, I'm going to go 7 days and I'm not going to touch the minibar, and every day I'm going to tell you that I did it. It wasn't a big habit that I was trying to deal with. I picked one little thing that just was bugging the hell out of me, and I did it, and you know what, it worked. It's kind of wild. And so I've actually started doing this, and it's like just kind of performing experiments on myself, and then when I was talking to BJ, I said, wow, that's kind of like a tiny habit. And there's really powerful stuff in here. I think what's going to be challenging for all of us, and I think there's a lot of people here who can directly or indirectly find ways of having an impact on helping to address obesity and the behaviors behind it. I think the challenge is the things that you're working on, how do you ladder them back to the bigger, more comprehensive effort that an individual goes through, and what can you come up with that can help an individual start making these kinds of systematic changes in their life. It's complicated, but I firmly believe that it's possible. I'm incredibly proud that I had no idea when I took a job at Weight Watchers what I was getting into. I really didn't appreciate everything that the company did. I feel like I'm incredibly fortunate to work at a place that I think is in the right moment at the right time with the right set of tools and the right orientation to be kind of a mass distribution system of behavior modification. We have to get a lot better at it. I would argue, and I'm biased, that we're better than anybody else at delivering population-based behavior modification for obesity, but I would also tell you that we're only half as good, if that, versus what I think we could be. So it was, working with people like BJ and a lot of other people thinking about this. We think there's huge strides we could make to once and for all break this country out of a dieting mindset and start pushing this country to start systematically changing long-term habits. It is the only way to solve obesity, is to go through this very messy business of getting people to start establishing new routines and start getting rid of the routines that aren't helpful for them, and to help them manage their personal environment so that they're not constantly being tested. So that's what we're up to. We're always interested in talking to other folks and like-minded people in whatever the context might be. None of us can solve this problem alone. It really is going to be kind of this broader ecosystem, particularly in health. What I would tell you, just my last parting shot, is, if you look at obesity from a public health point of view, you can try to nail it by reverting the food system back. I think it's a wonderful effort. Somebody's got to work on that. I have diminished expectations on how fast that will happen. However, what I would tell you is that all of you in healthcare can begin having a major impact on this, not 5 years from now, but 5 minutes from now, and I encourage you to do so. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, it is a big, huge issue.
So to speak.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of wrong-headed thinking around how behavior works and behavior change and so on. Why? Why has that persisted?
Yeah, honestly, I think one of the big reasons it's persisted is that, you know, it's interesting. When I was reading Duhigg's book, and I had a chance to meet him, really nice guy. Yep. And I was reading through his bibliography and references. Practically none of the interesting research predates 1995. You know, so if you look at like MIT is doing a lot of great stuff with this, and you've been working on this and a lot of other people, it's relatively new science. And I think part of the problem is that science never really sort of has fully wrapped its arms around behavior modification because they can't see it. It's not a pathway that is easily measurable and observable. That's starting to change, I think, with things like fMRIs and better understanding of sort of, you know, how thought processing works and neural pathways and everything else. But it's kind of new science. Whereas the focus has been, you know, if there's, you know, 1,000 calories being expended against, you know, the science of obesity, I would argue 98% has been on the finer points of nutrients, and about 2% has been on behavior.
Yeah. Let's talk about the market side of that equation, though. Why do you think people are going for these crazy diets and crazy ideas, despite the fact that, you know, they have all this evidence they don't work?
What I would tell you is that you can never underestimate the emotional complexity of obesity. You can never underestimate the emotional toll that it takes on people. You know, they're being bombarded with messages on body image, and on one hand, and on the other hand, they've tried so many times before, they fail. They don't want to change their life. It's hard to change your life. Nobody wants to get that message. What everybody wants is a new weight loss medication that'll make it all go away. And even the FDA is so desperate that they're approving yet 2 more weight loss drugs that, sorry for going on a minor rant, like they're drugs with side effects, and at some point people are going to stop taking the drugs, and what's going to happen? What I would tell you is that people who are taking weight loss medication to lose weight aren't doing anything else. And they're not going to do anything else because they want a simple solution. Everybody wants it to be easy, which is what you're trying to do, which I think is interesting, is sort of doing a judo on that, which is trying to make habits easy. Because maybe, I think the challenge I'll always put back on that is, how do you make a tiny habit feel compelling to someone who's not game to try and experiment?
Are there, we'll come back to that. Are there people who can take these huge leaps? This event's about baby steps and how to design for baby steps and how they work and so on. I imagine there are some people in the world that can take these big leaps. They can radically change their lives overnight. Who are those people? What characterizes those people?
I think my observation would be when people succeed in doing that, and we see people succeed in doing that, the trigger that activates them is so powerful that it gives them kind of superhuman strength. And they literally, they can power right through it. What we see is that, I mean, here's the thing about thinking about a weight loss or behavior modification process. Success rates, let me just be open about this. For most weight loss interventions, and I'm not talking about the goofy late night TV fad diet stuff, I'm talking about legitimate, medically sound weight loss interventions. If you can get 10% of people on a given attempt to 10% weight loss, you're doing well. That kind of puts it in context.
Wow. You said something at TEDMed that kind of surprised me. It surprises me less now, but let me put it out there. I forgot the exact wording. You basically said, you know, losing weight and maintaining it is the answer to all our problems. And I was like, he really just said that on video, on these TED videos? Since I then I thought, well, I'm a behavior change guy. Let's go to Weight Watchers. Let's understand what that's about. I've lost 12 pounds, which has had an unexpectedly delightful effect on my life. Just 12 pounds.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I'm starting to believe more what David said, but I still don't totally believe it. Was that overstatement?
Well,
or
you know
what do you think?
what's weird is that it's hard. It's, you know, when you're carrying an extra 50 to 100 pounds on your frame, the impact that that has on your body, it's significant. Like our bodies were not genetically made for us to be this obese. And when you're carrying that extra kind of weight, I mean, so my personal example was that I had my cholesterol at the age of 34 was 260. And it's now 180. You know, it's just radical changes. My resting heart rate is like down 20 beats per minute or whatever it is. I mean, it's just, and I've seen people with Crohn's disease, like all of a sudden they lose 60 pounds and the symptoms go away. I mean, it's really strange how much of a powerful effect becoming healthy can have on so many other maladies. And it's hard to describe, but that's what the point I made at that TED Med was that I feel like this guy in a covered wagon selling snake oil that, like, you know, this will solve all of your health problems with this ointment.
And I'm sure that's how it came across to some people. Did
Only
you get
the-
a
only the
negative?
cynical
Did you
ones.
get a Did you get a negative reaction?
No, I didn't, because I think I wasn't putting it in the context of Weight Watchers. I was putting it in the context more that health has a huge impact on health. So in other words, like becoming healthy is surprisingly powerful in terms of its ability to strengthen our bodies, to improve our defenses against disease. I mean, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud. It has been a long time since I've had a cold. I used to get colds all the time. I'm sure that's going to come back to haunt me in like 24 hours. But I think most people intuitively get the power of it. Where I think people are frustrated is they've seen everything fail. And I think one of the problems that I see is someone asked me last night, do you think nutrition labeling in restaurants will fix the way people order in restaurants? And my answer was no, not in isolation. I mean, it's been looked at and it's conflicting research and everything else. But what I would tell you is that for someone going through a behavior change process who's trying to make better choices, giving them access to that information in a bold and prominent way, I believe absolutely will change behaviors. I did it last night. This never happens, but they posted calories on everything on the menu. And I started making different decisions about what I was eating, but I was already motivated to do those things.
Let's geek out a little bit about how behavior works.
Would you like the object-oriented programming?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I mean, and it kind of is. You know, you are programming yourself, and you're writing a computer script, and you're iterating it to optimize it. But you know, it's weird. I'm not sure I want to go on the record saying that because with persuasive technology lab already sounds kind of creepy and evil to begin with. But decisions and habits, decisions versus, where's the line between decision and habit? What's the relationship? And this is kind of geeky because it's the kind of thing we would discuss in my lab and whatever. And here's what the premise is. When people say, oh, decisions, and it's like, you know what, habits have not very much to do with decisions.
No, they don't.
So how do you use that language? How do you think about that?
So the way I think about this, the way I think about that is I think of habits as sort of the 80% foundation that we're dealing with. So like, again, it's like always having a healthy breakfast, you know, trying to have a healthy lunch, exercising every day, these sort of like these kind of uber habits that we're building up to. These are things that we can then start to count on. It doesn't help when you're on, you know, it's funny, I was on the book tour, I was on Access Hollywood, which was just
He's worn makeup the last 7 of 8 days, is that it? Yeah, TV.
But I was showing on TV, like a cup full of nuts is, and you see a cup, it's pretty small, it is 800 calories. Nuts are good for you. But yet a cup is 800 calories, and everybody, I talked about it in the show, and then the people who were interviewing me said, oh my God, like American Airlines gives that out like every time I fly business class. My point is that's a different example, whereas I'm trying to create a habit where I tell the flight attendant not to bring me nuts ahead of time, cold state, so I'm not sort of making a decision while I'm all hot and bothered about, you know, almonds, which I get. But the other point I would make is that as you do this over time, what we know from research is that your prefrontal cortex actually starts, they've done fMRIs, it starts flashing more. In other words, think of this as, you know, the mental muscle in front starts getting stronger, allowing you, it actually does, I mean, I say willpower is overrated, but over time, in the moment where you're having to make a flash decision, it can actually help you make a flash decision. And so I think of that as like that last 10% of decisions where you don't have a chance, like it doesn't fall neatly into a habit. And so I tend to think of those as sort of a little bit separate and complementary. But then the other thing I put around this is that, you know, establishing a habit's hard enough. You can make it a lot easier by re-engineering your personal environment. And this is something Wansink was a big fan of, which was if you have a weakness for, say, cashews, which I do, keep them out of plain sight. Because without the visual cue, you're going to be much less likely to be tempted, which will make the process of establishing a new habit massively easier. And so it's like you start putting kind of all these things together, and then I think you finally have a chance to help people take a much more systematic approach that doesn't feel nearly as overwhelming.
I'm a big fan of changing your context to then change your behavior in the future. What is stopping people? What stops people from what I call the motivation wave? Motivation wave hits, I suddenly have the ability to do things that were hard previously, going in, changing their context, throwing away all the nuts, you know, buying fruits and vegetables, learning how to cook a recipe. What stops people from changing that context?
Here's what we typically see is we see people often dropping out for a few different reasons. One is they become bored. They're tired of doing the same thing over and over again, and they get into a rut. Two is they're not having any success. That's actually the biggest reason why people bail, is because if they don't see any pounds come off, they get frustrated, they get mad at themselves, they quit, they walk away. Another one is that circumstances change. And this is, I think, an interesting one from a habit perspective, which is that if all of a sudden I'm traveling a lot, there's a tendency for me to say, well, that's a different context, so everything kind of goes out the window. And what I've learned painfully over years of business travel is that it is critical for me to recreate my context and routines and keep them consistent no matter where I am. I always go to a gym, I always go to a hotel that either has a great gym or is co-located next to a great gym. I always make sure that I order the same oatmeal and berries, and that the whole thing I do for breakfast, so I try to respect my routine and go out of my way to keep it consistent when I travel. But when life gets in the way, you know, all of a sudden in the most obvious example is the holidays, like that sort of like horrific period between Thanksgiving Day and the day after Christmas or New Year's Day, when people are like, oh, well, now it's different. And everything kind of goes out the window because their context changes.
Exactly. So, of course, one of the things I've seen over and over and over again in Tiny Habits, as I read the thousands of people that are doing it and what's working and what's not, is travel is brutal on habits. Any unexpected thing. Weekdays are different than weekends, which is the reason it's a Monday through Friday program. But the travel, the maintaining the healthy habits when you travel. And it's interesting that you try to make them kind of one and the same. That's really interesting. I'll have to think about that, because I've thought of them as like you got the normal BJ routine habits at home and then travel habits, and they're a little bit separate. But if you were to make a guess, how many habits you have to create in order to keep weight off? What would be the ballpark guess? And this is totally like abstract, unfair question, but I'm curious.
I would actually build on that question by saying, how many questions do you have to create, and on average, how many habits do you have to get rid of?
Yeah.
The ones that you have to create and they're not tiny. Well, it depends how you think about it, but I would say broadly 5 to 6, like go-to habits.
Okay.
What I think is harder for people is the stuff that gets them in trouble. I have no science to back this up, and so I'm going to create.
Okay.
I'm going to try to replace the 21-day myth with a new myth.
Yeah, good. Okay.
But my new myth would be that I think it is a lot easier to establish a new habit than it is to get rid of an old habit.
I'm with you on that.
And now habits you're getting rid of, I think it's more because they're harder to identify, and they're harder to kind of diagnose and debug. And I think it's one of the problems people run into is they really don't have a way of analyzing these kind of bad habits that they're struggling with. They really don't know the cue that's causing them. They don't know the reward or like why they're doing them in the first place. And if they don't properly diagnose the habit in terms of what's the reward, what's the cue, why is it happening, it's really hard for them to get rid of it because then they're not able to think about how to replace it.
Okay, so you said, I'm a little surprised you said 5 to 6 habits. That's it?
For me,
You
that's
only
kind
need to create
of,
5
no,
to
but
6
that's
habits?
actually how I think about it. It's like, you know, at a very basic level.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about this as someone who's like been doing Weight Watchers for 12 years. The way I think about it now is one habit for me is, you know, having the same breakfast every day.
Okay.
A second habit is having lunch done in a particular way. A third habit is using a particular routine and process when I'm ordering at a restaurant.
Okay.
Fourth habit is exercising and doing my exercise routine every day. Now there's a bunch of steps within each of those.
Okay. And that's probably where we differ, because I probably slice it a lot smaller. And
well, that's an important point, because to establish any one of those, there are a bunch of little things that had to happen.
Okay.
But once you're there, I think the way you think about it is it's more like you tend to think like, I always have this breakfast, I always have this lunch. You know, I have a very particular approach and strategy when I'm in a restaurant, so on and so forth. But that's not to say that's kind of end state. As opposed to how that's different than like, I love the research and what you guys are doing with exercise, because it's how I was able to do it. Like doing these little baby steps of like setting up my gym clothes and getting a particular routine that I was happy with and making sure that I had the right music to listen to, and all those things allowed me to build that up, and then I gradually added things over time.
Okay, so in the Weight Watchers program, and I love it, so I live in a small town of about 12,000 people, and I go to the local meeting, and they have no idea that we know each other, you know, and so on. I just show up as a normal person, mostly my partner and I, and all these women, and it's really, actually it's fascinating. What has surprised me, is even as a behavior change guy, it's like 3 months into the program, going every week, wow, here's this new thing I'm now ready to do. Here's the next little habit that I'm ready to start doing.
Right.
So my question for you has to do with, you know, for weight loss and maintaining weight, which is an outcome, not a behavior, there's all these behaviors you have to change, stop, so on.
Yep.
And people can't do them all at once.
Right.
But yet the Weight Watchers program does kind of present you, here you go.
Yep.
How is it that, so 3 months in, find the boom, here's a new thing I'm ready to do, and how does that sequencing happen? Do you orchestrate that?
Well,
Is it just?
I think this is where a lot of to me, this is where a lot of our R&D and innovation is going to be going, is to become much more explicit. I think it kind of happens by accident right now. But what I would argue is that, again, it's, you know, it's funny, what I didn't mention as a habit is tracking my points.
Yeah.
And the reason that's not a habit for me, because I don't want to track my points every day. You know, oh my God, I just said that in public. I'm not that guy. I'm not a to-do list guy. However, I will track points as a tool to help me course correct. And I tracked a lot of points when I was losing my weight, but I will track points to help me course correct because it's really valuable. All of a sudden, it like gets me kind of back in my routine and my groove, and it sort of reminds me of like all these dumb, mindless things that I've been doing and sort of lying to myself about. But in terms of the, you know, the way I'm individually going through it right now is I try to make it a point that at any given point in time, I'm working on 1 or 2 things where I think I can have impact on.
So then the successful members are kind of taking on that, they're self-selecting, here's the next thing I can actually do.
I think the ones who, my guess is that the ones who are the most successful are doing it naturally.
Okay.
For the same reason I started doing it naturally, just because you think about it and you start going that way. The opportunity I see for us is to become, over time, much, much more explicit about that process and much more transparent about it, with the benefit of all of this kind of research that's been sort of like percolating up.
Yeah. How many people have been to a Weight Watchers meeting before? You don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. Actually, not that many, less than 20% of the audience. I would encourage all, as scientists, as behavior change people, you should go and you see what's going on. I mean, it's been illuminating for me to see how it works. In the future, all my lab members are going to be required to go to some Weight Watchers meetings, whether they need it or not, to be there in this context of people trying to change their behavior week after week. One of the biggest surprises to me has been the meetings are not about rah-rah, get motivated. It's how to. The meetings, at least the tone of, I've been to 2 different meetings in different locations with different leaders. It's always, here's how to do this, here's how to do this, tips and tricks shared among the people.
Yep.
And it's not rah. It's not the motivation thing, it's the ability thing. And that was a real surprise to me. I was expecting something else.
It's a little different. Just for fun, did anyone watch Mad Men last week?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Actually, it's a little, we do not publicly weigh people where we read out, like, you lost a pound, like, maybe in the 60s, not now, in case anybody saw it and was freaking out about it, as I was. But it's you know, what I would say about group support is, in our meetings, is that, again, from a behavior mod point of view, part of it is this exchange of tips and tricks, which feels, it's empowering because you're getting good ideas, and it's actually, you get something out of that, and it's a charge, and it kind of is building confidence as well as giving you ideas. But what I would tell you is that the really simple idea behind group support is that we all are walking around with all this crazy stuff in our heads, all of these weaknesses, all of these feelings of personal failings that we think are unique to us individually. And what's a very powerful idea is that when we share those experiences, we realize that everybody else is going through the same thing. I mean, I get this on my blog all the time, and people are always amazed. They're like, wow, I thought I was the only person who thought that way. And that's an important part of that, but I would say that, you know, some Weight Watchers meetings have much more of like a Baptist revival feel. Others are going to be a little bit kind of more California chic, kind of low-key. So
Here's this
it varies.
new, like, red pepper spread you can get at Trader Joe's. You know, it's that kind of tips and tricks they're exchanging. How many points? Oh, it's just 1 point.
But actually, the importance of that is that what people realize is that they start, you know, I would say they're trying to debug their problems. So one classic example is, how many would guess that a tub of hummus, which we all think of as being good for us, well, if I ask a question, I'll just tell you the answer, is that a tub of hummus is going to be roughly 900 calories. 90 calories for the serving size is 2 tablespoons. You find this stuff out, and it makes your toes curl. Yet you could also find out that, you know, a lot of bean dips, which are not made with oil, would only have, say, 25 calories for 2 tablespoons. Why does this matter? Because people are debugging their food patterns, and they're replacing this with that, and they're sort of systematically making these changes, and therefore part of what's happening in a meeting is it ends up becoming a clearinghouse for people exchanging these things. What's interesting about that is people ask me all the time, you know, actually one question I almost always get, and I'm almost surprised you didn't bring it up, why don't we have online meetings? We actually do not have online meetings. We could. Like, we've got a very robust software development capability. We've got 2 million online subscribers. We could do it just like that. The reason we don't do it is I'm not convinced it works. I'm not convinced that you can create the same sort of powerful kind of behavior change effects, belief, everything else, purely in an online community, which is why I'm sitting here, not sitting up on a screen being beamed in from Skype. Human contact still matters. The other point, therefore, I would encourage all of you, particularly those of you in the application development space, is don't try to create applications that you think are going to completely take away our need for human interaction. Rather, create applications that allow them to be the best at what they're capable of being as part of a behavior change process. Because I see too many people thinking that they can try to, you know, sort of do everything. And I think what we find is that if you're thinking about behavior modification, it really does require a rich combination of both face-to-face as well as technology and incentives and messaging and all these things. When you put them together in the right kind of system, can have a huge multiplying effect on each other.
We're going to wrap up here soon, but I want to ask you a question about tracking. It's a little bit of a thought experiment.
Yep.
I've known, I worked on a project, 15 years ago, and worked with a weight loss expert, and I asked her, if you could get people to do one thing to lose weight, what would it be? And she'd say, write down everything you eat. That is, if you can do that, it just seems to magically melt off. So I've kind of been tuned into that for a while. I love the Point Plus program, the fact that you can eat all the fruits and vegetables you want, mostly. And it's like 0 points? Wow, that's awesome. But my question's more this. Tracking's hard to do. And the iPad app is, I found the best way to do it because, you know, I got more real estate and so on. If you could make tracking simpler, so I think we would both agree that if people track, they have a much, much better chance of losing weight.
I would answer, you know, it's interesting.
That's not my question.
Oh, sorry.
But do you agree with that? Do you agree?
I do, but that would only be my partial agreement.
Okay, let me keep going, and then you can say I disagree with the premise. But let's say, you know, I'm a big fan of simplicity, make things really easy to do. What if you could track your food in 1 click? It's just like 1 click, it got tracked. Or versus, you don't do anything, it gets automatically tracked. In both cases, you get the same kind of feedback. Here's how many points, or here's what I actually ate in terms of calories. And the question's about 1 click versus no click, automated tracking. Do you think there would be a difference? Do you lose the magic of tracking when it becomes 0 click, where it's like done automatically? Is there something about 1 click? Or maybe it does need to be 5 steps, get out the pen, write it down, get out the app. What are your thoughts?
So my thoughts, my hypothesis would be that 0 clicks may not actually be a good idea. 0 action, because if it's 0 action, what are you being mindful of? I mean, because that's the underlying premise behind tracking is mindfulness. So if you're not actually doing anything at all, you're not forcing yourself to become cognizant of what you're doing. On the other hand, if I have to take 7 steps to do that, I'm not going to do it because it's too much of a pain in the neck. Therefore, you know, for us, this is why we launched a barcode scanner. It's why, you know, we're continuing to look at ways of streamlining and making our interface less complicated, everything else. But what I would also say is that my partial agreement was, for I think most people, the idea of tracking everything they eat for the rest of their lives is something that will never happen. But I would argue that you shouldn't have to, because tracking is not the end. It is a means of establishing a new habit, like having a good breakfast. It is, so it's like, I geekily describe like Weight Watchers as Batman's utility belt. Which is, you know, we're sort of, you know, it's just, it's one of those things you use in the process of becoming a superhero, like in this crazy food world, is tracking. But the point is, tracking to an end is kind of what I would call a dieting mindset. Tracking to achieve long-term, you know, new sort of behaviors and kind of new routines is incredibly powerful. And so how you think about tracking, which is why people can't count calories for very long. You know, they lose the thread so fast. There's a bunch of calorie counting apps out there that are currently being downloaded en masse. You wonder how many of those are being used after 2 weeks. And, you know, I think part of the program is they're not part of a bigger program. They're not individually compelling enough, and there's sort of like, there's a novelty for a while, and there's some people who love counting calories and they use them all the time. But counting calories is not the answer. Counting points in isolation is not the answer. The answer is establishing new habits. Counting points is a tool to help you establish new habits.
Great. Good. I'm going to give you a chance for a closing statement, and then we'll thank you for being here. But before we do that, we're going to have like a 26-minute break, be back here at 10:47. We're going to have a super raffle at that moment, like the biggest raffle we've had. I'm trying to lure you back in on time. I guess watch what you eat at the break. I hope we have really healthy food coming. David, so what would be the parting words here?
My parting words would be is that I cannot believe I'm sitting in a room full of people who care about nothing quite as much as behavior modification. It's a little mind-boggling, because I would tell you that in the vast majority of the health world, people don't think about this stuff nearly enough. I would tell you that all of the interesting opportunities in health, broadly speaking, many of them are going to come from behavior modification. I was at a health conference a couple weeks ago, and I can't remember exactly who was saying it, but you know, this very notable health research scientist said his prediction was we will debug and completely unlock the genome long before we figure out how to get people to change their behaviors. You guys you're fighting the good fight. Keep doing it. It's where all the action is going to be going forward, and God bless you for doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
when she says she loves me.